wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
You're listening to A Quirky Journey, the healthy family podcast with your hosts Jo Whitten and Fuad Kassab. Hi everyone, it's Jo. Welcome to A Quirky Journey this week. We're really excited to have some really interesting things to tell you. Okay, so we're going to go on to the podcast now, and I want to tell you a little bit about Beth. So Beth is the director of Little Fuss Pot, which she began, I think, 5 years ago. She helps people from all over the world with mealtimes that are less than peaceful. And we all have been there. We've all had the tantrums at mealtimes from kids that don't want to eat what we're giving them. And, you know, a lot of kids really struggle with just wanting the white food and the carbohydrates, and they don't want their veggies, or they don't want to try meat, or they don't want to try, you know, all the things that the rest of the family eats. And it can be very stressful. And it may be just a fussy eater, or it may be a problem eater. There's actually a difference between the two. But Beth can help with both of these. And she's known as the super nanny of mealtimes. She brings the core fundamentals of many different professions together to make a one-stop shop for all types of fussy eaters, from extreme fussy eaters that may limit to 1 or 2 or 3 foods, to the just simply reluctant eaters that just, you know, they want to cause a fuss each meal. So Beth completed her clinical nutrition qualifications in 2012. And then she began creating therapy workshops, perfecting her courses, eliminating advice that's now redundant or counterproductive to raising happy, healthy children. She's always learning, researching new techniques and approaches, and she's just really right at the top of her game with tackling fussy eating. And she says that her constant research and development means that her methods are always evolving. They're constantly updated, and she shares them amongst a really supportive community that you can join. And the goal is making every bite count. So her main motivation for learning was food disorders in her own son. So you can hear about that on the podcast. And she's really passionate about helping parents to encourage their children with healthy eating and helping them to get over aversions to eating. But more than anything, she just loves being able to help families to have a much happier experience with and healthier children. And we talk about all sorts of things, from particular foods that cause fussy eating and sensory processing disorder, and methods, and how to avoid even having a fussy eater, and when to get professional help. All these things are included in this podcast. So listen in, and I hope it's really, really helpful for you. Thanks so much for being here and listening. And if you enjoy this podcast, please click through and have a look at Beth's website. And we'd love for you to go to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating for this podcast so that more people can hear it as well. All right. Thanks so much for being here, guys. Love you lots. Welcome, Beth. It's so good to have you on the podcast. How are you?
Oh, good, Jo. Thanks for having me.
That's good. I'm hoping that we can talk about fussy eating and help some of the parents out there who find it very difficult to get their kids to eat well. Can you just tell us a little bit about you first, and what you do and how you got into this?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I kind of fell into it, I guess.
As we often do.
Yeah. So my passion has always been about how food heals the body. I would much prefer sit down and watch documentary after documentary on food and what types of foods should be eaten or avoided to either improve or avoid a certain condition. And so, I mean, and this was on my travels. I lived in the UK for 8 years and in Spain for 5 years.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I know you've just been there. And while I was studying there, my husband was sort of tied up in work, and I really wanted to move home. I'd sort of had enough of the travel, wanted to move home and start a family. But I thought, well, what am I going to do when I get there? Because I kind of put my life on hold. And I thought I'd follow my nutritional interest. So I buckled down and got studying, and I completed that just as I was birthing my son in Spain. With a big language barrier. And when I came back, I didn't do too much with it. But then as we started to introduce solids to my son, I noticed that there was actually right from the beginning, even when he was breastfeeding, I noticed that there was something not quite typical about the way he ate, and he wouldn't feel hungry at all. And I kind of pushed out of my mind and just did the best I could to try and make sure he was getting enough calories in every day. And then it got to around 12 months of age when I noticed he was completely refusing all foods. Wow. He didn't like the sensation of food going into his mouth at all. By this stage, we'd moved back to Australia. We moved back when my son was 5.5 months old. So I was equipped with information in my language, which was a lot easier. Yeah. And he was later diagnosed with a sensory processing disorder and a food neophobia towards green foods and also creamy consistencies. So working with
neophobia, I haven't even heard of that before.
It's a fear. It's a genuine fear and causes anxiety and a spike of cortisol around those foods. So it was new to me. That was very new to me. And so my instant go-to was what in his diet is causing this, because I know that I've read Dr. Natasha's book on GAPS, and I know that anxiety and behavioural symptoms can be brought on by food. But at this point, he was literally only having, pureed vegetables, and I was feeding according to expert books that were around at that point. And so after the diagnosis anyway, fast forward to around about when he was 2, I made it my mission to find out everything possible to help him overcome this sensory processing disorder. And what I noticed that my nutritional background is really what made the most, the best difference, because it helped regulate his emotions and his anxiety around food by just removing and changing a lot of foods in his diet. We also acknowledged that he had a vitamin B and zinc deficiency, which was brought on by some of the foods in his diet. So coupled with that, then I started to work by putting together a lot of therapies, in particular around sensory enrichment therapies. And today he would eat almost just about anything. The only thing I haven't been able to get him to eat is avocado, because of course it is green and it is creamy, so he just
too much.
Well, he will eat it in sushi. My sushi was a big obstacle that we were able to get into his diet last year, because we've got him off gluten and dairy. So we went on the mission, and he'll eat avocado in that, but picking it up and eating it knowingly,
Don't worry, I have a couple of kids that won't eat it either.
I'd say that
they're teenagers.
It's probably the texture, I'd say.
Yeah.
But I was the same. I didn't eat avocado until, Mum used to put it in dips in guacamole. That was the go-to dip in the 80s.
Yes.
And there used to be a big bowl of corn chips on the table, and I just had my hands in the bowl just nicking all the corn chips, and she said, I've got this big bowl of guacamole left here because you've eaten all the chips. And so she forced me to eat it. And I eventually liked it, and then I started making it. I started perfecting it, putting different spices in there like cumin to juice it up, and it ended up being my favourite thing. So
that's funny.
Yeah.
I just snuck it into smoothies.
I can do that, and I can also get raw nuts into smoothies for a bit of extra protein. So 5 years ago I launched Little Fuss Pot, and what it was predominantly online, face-to-face with clients, walking them through 50% obviously the diet and how to change it. If you think the people that are coming to me are more so the children who are on probably carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates, about 90% of the time, and then possibly still a whole lot of milk in the diet. And, you know, you've got to start with basics. So talking about a GAPS diet or anything like that is really far-fetched. Yes. My first port of call would be to balance the diet first and then start swapping foods out to start to build a good biome. But certainly from the outset, what we wanted to do is just get the child off any foods that are causing the picky eating, because there's a lot of foods that do, and then always be making improvements in the diet to get to the ultimate goal of only foods that nourish the body. My motto is make every bite count. So
that's a good motto.
It is. That's what we aim to achieve at the end.
Can you expand a little bit on that concept that some foods cause picky eating?
There's a few in different ways and shapes and forms. I'll start with zinc. Zinc is probably one of the most important minerals in the body that we need. It fights off cold and flus. It helps us regulate our temperature, and it also goes somewhat the way to helping hormones be released, like ghrelin. Ghrelin is one of the hormones that encourages us to feel hungry, and when we don't secrete ghrelin, that hormone, we don't have the desire to eat. So often I will suggest trying a supplement of zinc for children, because it can, there's foods in the diet that will typically reduce zinc, and one of those is chips, potato chips, and fried food, particularly fried food. But if you think chips and chicken nuggets are usually a child's go-to when they're younger, so they're common foods that will strip. Then you've got the combination of foods as well. So a child's go-to is carbohydrates. Why? Because it turns to sugars in the body, and they love that dopamine hit when the sugar, reaches the brain. And what you'll find is that will be what they want. They'll get this spike in the sugar, and that will just perpetuate itself throughout the day. They'll get a low, they'll want carbohydrates, their sugar goes up and down and up and down, and that also, as you know, will cause peaks and troughs in behaviour as well throughout the day. But what I find is that when you couple carbohydrates, especially refined carbohydrates, with other certain foods in the diet, in particular protein or dairy, it slows down the gastric system. It causes slow gastric emptying, and therefore, the child is not hungry. One of the questions I ask clients when I speak to them first on the phone is, would you actually consider your child hungry at all? Would you like to actually see a genuine hunger in your child? And we often see that is the case for children who are on heavy amounts of carbohydrates and dairy. But dairy has such a multi-directional problem, because I don't know if there's a whole lot of research behind it yet, but I've found that children on quite a lot of dairy will have problems with glandular type infections. So trouble swallowing, adenoids, tonsils, ear infections, chest infections, all the respiratory type of glands, and that will cause them to be frequently sick. Coupled with that, a low amount of zinc will, not boost a great immune system. So what I try to do first of all is to balance those foods out, and to make sure that they're not being eaten at the same time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Sorry, it just went really quiet. I think when you say that certain foods cause fussy eating, I was thinking, what does she mean? But now that totally makes sense. I understand what you're saying. That's really, really good. Yeah,
it all just comes down to the balance, I guess. And you can balance. I mean, I was speaking with a client yesterday whose 2-year-old child was still on purees, and everything was pureed, and hasn't an idea about food yet at all. And she was quite skeptical. She goes, I don't think you can balance this diet out. And actually, apart from purees, was on bread. So toast in the morning, sandwich for lunch, and usually toast in the evening. And whatever puree she can get would be obviously with fruits and vegetables in it. And that was the only micronutrients this child was having. And you can balance even that out. You can make sure the child's only having maybe 1 or 2 slices of bread, and bring in some of the previous foods that a child used to like, once you're removing dairy and the amount of refined carbohydrates, because the child's going to naturally feel hungry.
Yes.
So we'll typically go towards the foods they used to eat in the past rather than new foods. So the first thing we do is just try to get old foods back into the diet first once we remove some of the problems, and then that's where we start to make some progress early on.
So you find that they'll start to limit things that they used to eat because they're filling up on the bread and dairy and stuff.
Yeah, it's not just really the filling up, it's actually what it does in the body. If you think, and often people go to dairy with the wrong approach. I've seen so many times, I get clients to fill out a pre-consultation form, and you see a lot that they will have suspected lactose intolerance when they're younger. But people forget that dairy isn't just made out of lactose, and it's not the only problem in dairy that causes digestive problems. We also have casein, and that is really difficult for children to digest. And if you think about the composite of breast milk as opposed to dairy, breast milk has maybe about, or depending on how thick your milk is, you'll either have between about 12 to 18% casein. Dairy has 80%.
Oh, wow.
So it's not an easy thing for a young bub to digest. And if you think about the fact that when formula is made, it's made with a whole lot of iron in there. Iron also slows down the digestive system. I mean, I don't know if you've ever taken iron tablets yourself, but the first thing it does is causes constipation.
Yeah.
So it's often a big problem that you've got dairy and iron in the same milk, because that will also cause that problem as well.
Yeah, makes sense. So what about the idea of if you just keep serving a food to a child, they'll eventually eat it?
Well, that hasn't worked for anyone I know yet. I cringe a lot when I see that, because I'm obviously on all of the picky eating, fussy eating, food neophobia and ARFID sites on Facebook. Anyone I can find, I'm on there. And I see that, and I don't even bother commenting anymore.
You don't want to get in an argument.
No, not an argument, but there's just so much wrong with that. You've got to find the cause first. There's
exactly. You've got to find the root cause.
Yeah. Who's to say that this child doesn't have a sensory processing disorder and is genuinely, fearful and gets anxiety when they see that food?
Yeah.
Showing it to them every day may reduce the severity of the anxiety, but if they're not hungry and they don't have any interest in that food and they don't eat anything like that food, if you're going to serve up broccoli but they don't eat anything green, not even kiwi fruit or a grape in their diet, you've got buckleys of eating broccoli. So I know a lot of therapists use the word food chaining. I call it stretching food preferences, but that is part 3 on my course, and it's the last because what we need to do a lot of groundwork as to what the child's sensory preferences and avoidances are. This idea has been taken straight from the Sensational Mealtimes book, which is Making Sense of Mealtimes, the Gillian Griffiths and Denise Stapleton book. And what they've done is they've got charts in that book. It's a great book for anyone. It's a great starter book for anyone dealing with picky eating. And what you do is you map out all of the foods that your child currently eats with regards to the texture, the colour, the shape and size, what temperature they prefer, everything. You analyse all their foods and you take that information and you say, right, my child doesn't eat anything green. They like a lot of crunch. They certainly love carbohydrates. Anything beige, consistent, and consistent we mean package, obviously, because it never changes. And so that really eliminates home cooking, right? But we take that and we say, right, of this sensory preferences, what is our child most likely to eat? And we start from there. We don't just plonk broccoli on the plate 20 times and expect them to eat it. There's a lot of groundwork that has to happen first. And we certainly need to remove the cause before we get any progress with that type of therapy.
So you've had a bit of... you've looked into gaps and like the theory there where you start to bring in the gut healing foods and then they will naturally start to expand their diet as their gut heals. Can you talk about that a little bit, how you work that in?
I don't particularly approach gaps with...
No, obviously, but just like how would you get some healing foods in first?
Yeah, well, what I would... if you think that my course runs for 6 weeks, so if the child's eating a balanced diet and has I kind of loosely work towards the nutritional guidelines of Australia, where they have to have protein, carbohydrates, fruits, vegetables. Dairy I kind of loosely scrub out, but but I kind of work to the other ones. I definitely reduce the carbohydrates unless they're whole foods,
Yeah.
But I do work towards the other three of having a protein a day, fruits and vegetables. If a child is eating that, but if a client comes in and they have a reasonably good diet, I mean, I've dealt with an African lady, and she had lots of fermented fish and vegetables and things like that. And that's when I would start working in the conversation of, well, does your child know what they're having? And if they don't know what they're having, I will start to make them more mindful of the food that they're eating. So that's the direction I would take that, because they've already got a really fantastic diet and probably has a really good gut. They just probably have no interaction with their senses, you might say.
Right.
So we would probably do more therapy than we would nutrition. But GAPS is probably not a question. It doesn't really, it's not easy to bring that up in the first 6 weeks.
Sorry, I didn't mean sort of starting them on GAPS. I meant, the principle of bringing in some foods that begin to heal the gut so that it quickens everything up so that they want to eat other foods. Is that something that you work in somehow?
Yeah.
It's more something that would be down the track.
I have a whole gut healing. In fact, Jo has a section in my course. She's a guest speaker, and she deals more with the actual gut healing foods and what, how we should be starting children off, getting it right from the first bite's her motto. She does a segment in my course on that. My job really is just to get them mindful about food, and also, set in front of them all the foods that they should be eating, match that with their sensory preferences, and get them working towards having those foods safely in a child's diet without there being any anxiety or gagging or, any serious aversions. From there, I mean, I do regular talks in my group therapy group on Facebook, and that's when I can get into more depth of, what foods are really great for gut healing. But typically what I'll do, just so it's not another element in the course, because there's so much, it's so overwhelming for someone to do the first 2 weeks of my course, that normally I'll say, get the child onto a probiotic, in a smoothie, something that's dairy-free and live. I would normally go that approach so that we're not too pressured with putting foods in the diet that the child hasn't even seen before, and then start working from there. Yeah.
So when you say beginning, so you mentioned about beginning from tiny children, so maybe when they're first starting solids, is there some things that you would recommend for parents so that they avoid ever having a fussy eater? Or is it just something, I mean, I know sometimes it's, if they have a sensory processing disorder, then that's going to be a whole different ballgame. But maybe you could just talk about some things that people could do to start working towards having kids that eat well from the beginning.
Well, you've got to, first of all, the theory behind the meaning behind sensory processing disorder is that the brain has forgotten to communicate with sensory receptors. That can happen and give the same synapses of symptoms as what a sensory processing disorder would be. So a disconnection or dormant senses presents the same reaction. They're really fearful of being around new food. So in the first part of the course, what I do is I get them to fill out a bit of a tick box, because it might not just be food that they're really sensitive around. It might be loud noises. It might be heavy visual scenarios, might be too many pictures on the wall, might be a bird squawking in the background. I had a client who had a cockatoo that was right next to the table, and the parents had no idea that this child wasn't eating because he was afraid of the bird. Simple things like that. And so what I suggest right from the outset is that you're always engaging your child's senses. I've got, I've just developed a placemat that's free for download, where we where we go around a circle in 4 steps, and with every food that may not be too familiar, we draw a picture of it, colour it in. Yeah, they're holding it the whole time, right? They're holding it in their hand, and they're circling the shape, the colour. Then they have a talk about how it feels to touch it. Is it watery? Is it soft, lumpy, dry? Does it crumble? Does it sprinkle like dust? And then to smell it. And this process is all about reconnecting with the senses. And that, I guess, from the out, I mean, obviously the placemat will be too young for bubs, but just having them play with food, making mess, put down drop sheets under the high chair, just have your child get real messy with food.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I really love that idea of that placemat. That's great.
Yeah, it's free for download. I've recorded a video demonstration of how to use it as well, and it's also
maybe just give me the link, and I'll put it in the notes afterwards for people to have a look. I
will do that. I've also coupled it with an app. So I went off to a workshop with Dr. Jennifer Thomas. She's a researcher at the Massachusetts General Hospital Department of Psychiatry at Harvard University, and they've developed an app called Fudo, F-U-D-O. I haven't been successful in finding the link, but I can give you.
Write it down.
It's a little black. The icon is a little black and white dog. I don't know why, but
it's like Fudo.
Fudo. It's F-U-D-O. Yeah, I don't know. It takes you about 25 minutes to complete the food analysis in that app, but I pair it with the placemat, and this is particularly for school-age children.
Yeah.
And so it takes about 25 minutes. You go through all these foods. Now, it has just about every food available in the world. There's foods in there I hadn't even recognised, and we certainly don't get in our supermarket. So you just sort of skip past it. But it has the child analyse whether they've had it before, and if they haven't had it before, whether they're interested to learn about it. Now, this is from a visual perspective because, as you understand, children judge by the eye when they're not using their senses. And so that will spit out a list at the end of all the vegetables, fruits, proteins, everything that the child is interested by the eye, and it gives you just that, that little step, first step,
little edge.
Yeah, it does. And then from there, we can use the placemat and all the other therapy techniques in the course to start to see whether they want to take that learning further.
Right, that's interesting. And so when you've got a really small child and you're just starting with solids, do you help parents with that kind of thing as well, or do you have any suggestions there?
Typically, no. I don't deal with the bubs. I think there's enough information out there at the moment for you to make your own choice, and there's experts out there. Jo Atkinson's probably the best one for that. She runs a course online, Getting It Right for the First Bite, and she talks about the pros and cons of, there's typically 2 types of suggestions with way you can eat. You can either feed by purees or baby-led weaning. I'm a huge fan of baby-led weaning. However, she goes through the pros and cons. It's not for everyone. Yeah. And you've got to think there's children out there with tongue ties and problems that will prevent them from being able to swallow foods from the outset. So I think every approach needs to be taken with caution. But just getting back to the story I had, so my son, because he wasn't particularly interested in foods from the outset, I typically went with spoon-fed because I thought there's no way he's going to pick up food and eat it on his own accord. He's not hungry at all. So I had one child fed that way. And it's really interesting, his journey, because he's been every food we've had to introduce to him. I could almost write a book. I probably will one day. Every single food that's in his diet that's good for him has a story or a way we've introduced it, or a particular technique I've used for that food. But with my daughter, she was baby-led weaned from 6 months, and I've also documented her journey, and there's nothing she doesn't eat. And she gets really messy with food still today. It bugs me a little. Yeah. She can't keep a porridge in a bowl when she eats. She's nearly 4. But, that's the way she was taught.
Yeah.
My son's typically a clean eater, but has a very limited amount of food.
So can you give us a couple of examples of how you introduced a healthy food to him that was interesting?
Okay, all right. I like to tell the story about the sushi because so I've got him off gluten and dairy.
Mhm.
So when we had him diagnosed with a sensory processing disorder, he was having a lot of behavioural issues at the time, and I did a lot more digging, and a doctor helped me to try and find whether there's any other underlying issues, and we found out he had pyrols, which
Yeah.
reduces the body of vitamin B and zinc in particular. And so we started supplementing with that, and we found that with administering that supplement, he was much more open to his anxiety, everything just diminished quite a lot.
Right.
So we started with rice, and we started with him playing with it. We started tipping it into cups, making sort of sandcastle-like things, and we started giving him sauce on the side of things to be able to make it colourful, but then he started to try it. We went through, similar to what the placemat is, an array of tick boxes on a piece of paper as to what he classified that rice to be, and all of a sudden he was eating rice. Great, we've done that. Now we needed the filler. We needed him to eat either a prawn or avocado. He's still not there yet, but cucumber, loves cucumber, anything to have inside of it. He would eat chicken. That was a problem. So we had that, but obviously the seaweed was going to be our biggest battle.
Yeah.
So what we did is we started making it first. I've recorded a lot of videos. They're in the course. We started making it first. I started making it with my daughter, and he started to show an interest. And he needed to come to me to say, I want to make that. If I were to force him, he would back away, and I'd never get him to that table to make it. So my daughter and I started making it, and then she, as always, loves sushi, so he's always seen us eating it. I'm gluten and dairy free as well. I'm celiac, so sushi's my go-to. And then he came one day, wanted to start making it, so I've got a video of that in the course of him making it. And then we went off to sushi at our local supermarket. And asked there, I said, if we come in really early in the morning, can he watch it being made? And so they let him in behind the scenes. They showed him the rice maker where it spits out the rice all evenly, because, we're obviously spreading it on, with the back of a spoon. He was so enthralled, and he's got a very mechanical brain. So he thought it was absolutely amazing that this rice was, beautifully formed on this mat. And because it was such a perfect food, and he's such a perfectionist, and that he doesn't get messy eating it, we really exposed all the benefits of this food, and that's what helped him to start to eat it. He won't have soy sauce, and certainly not wasabi like I would like it, but he's eating sushi, and he eats it willingly. I can put it in his lunchbox, and it will be gone by the end of the day. So
that's really good.
That was how we got him eating sushi.
So interesting that you had to do each little step, but that worked.
Well, I made it my mission. We had him home every day during the holidays. So I said, by the end of these holidays, I need him eating sushi. So we just worked step by step every day until we got him. And then lo and behold, that first week back at school, he had sushi, and it came back clean every day.
That's so good. It's really encouraging, because I think, we tend to, I guess, for people who don't have kids with sensory processing disorder, and you're not... you haven't been trained how to teach your kids to eat well, you tend to just put it in front of them and go, just eat it, like our parents did for us. You're sitting there until you eat that, and it just doesn't work for some kids.
Well, I guess it depends on your parenting style. Either that, or you just stick to what their safe foods are, just to save you the hassle of throwing it out every day.
Yeah, that's it. But I love these tips for ways to bring things in gently. And this is what I often say to people with changing adults' diets as well. Don't try to just completely turn everything over and upside down in one day. You're not going to stick to it. You're not going to like it. You're going to hate it. You've just got to bring things in gently, little by little. And it's just, same with kids.
You know what? This is really interesting. Sorry to cut you off there.
No, go.
Your books were probably one of the best tools we had in our kitchen for slowly swapping out foods. Your first book was all the basics of what we were already having, dairy replacement, gluten replacement, refined grain replacement. All of those recipes were there. But the dust cover on that book is hanging on by the slightest thread. And so that's what I say to people in the course, is that just have a look at the diet. and replace one thing at a time.
Yes.
And just don't buy it anymore. Wait till it's finished, but then just work on replacing that with a bit of sensory play and encouraging the child to try different versions of that until one day you're making that yourself and he doesn't know the difference.
Yeah, that's awesome. So things like tomato sauce, you mentioned sauce with the sushi. I know a lot of parents have to let their kids cover things in sauce so that they'll eat them. Do you find that it's pretty common?
I encourage that. I think, well, the reason why is because certainly children who don't like to get a lot of mess on their hands will avoid foods that are wet. So we start with just the regular tomato sauce out of the bottle. The reason why is because they like consistency.
Yes.
And they know that mum hasn't tampered with it if it's in that bottle.
Yeah.
So we start with just your regular Heinz tomato sauce, and we start getting them a little egg cup on the side of their meals. So that they're in control at all times as to how much sauce. But then I start to encourage parents to, if they're making a curry, dumb it down so that it's not spicy. Maybe put an extra bit of coconut milk in it, but have that on the side in an egg cup next to the rice so that they can, pour a little bit on. Yeah, be in control all the time. And so what I suggest, if you're making a pasta and you've got, a beautiful sauce that you're having with the pasta, freeze it in ice cube trays and then pop them into Ziploc bags so that you're always got a sauce on hand for every meal. So, I love incorporating sauces in that way.
What a good idea to, I never thought of that, doing different sauces that they can have on the side, because then you're getting all sorts of micronutrients into those.
Yeah, well, I like to make my gravies with bone broth. Yeah. I mean, they won't, my kids will never just drink bone broth. I don't think I really have the taste for that either.
Yeah.
But we've got a big wood stove in the kitchen, and so I'm always boiling up. We also have our own lambs on the property, so we've got conserve all the bones for the winter and boil them all up and make all the bone broths for the year. And they won't just drink it like that. So I'll make up a big batch of gravy, probably about 3 or 4 litres of it, and I'll freeze that into cupcake trays so that I can just pop it out and microwave it. And even if they're having sweet potato chips or something, you just dipped into that gravy, at least it's somewhat nutritious. It's making every bite count.
That's awesome.
The most mundane, child-friendly food.
Yeah, everyone loves gravy on things. Well, in our family, it's always a fight for the gravy.
But you'll find also as well, the more you encourage a child to have sauce, the easier it's going to be for you to, around winter time. Of course, what we like is curries and soups and stews and casseroles and all those really saucy type foods. And if you haven't incorporated anything other than the regular tomato sauce, it's going to be really hard for them to accept that. Or you're going to need to maybe just give them dry rice with dry chicken and vegetables that, that hasn't really progressed. So that's why I like just, giving them a little side sauce.
Well, that's a really good tip. So how do you see, so when kids start off with really limited diets, do you find that they can generally get to the stage where they're eating a very balanced, normal diet? Does it take a long time? Or I guess it's different with everyone, but, some parents just feel like they'll never, ever get there. And can you just give us a bit of encouragement?
Okay. I guess it depends on the cause. In the first part of the course, I guess this is what sort of sets me aside from other professionals out there, is that I like to deal with the cause first, because if you find that it's a sensory issue, then you're going to pedal hard with all the sensory therapies in the second part of the course. If it's diet, then you're going to take a lot from the menu plans and everything that I've got in the course and all the dietary advice, and really pedal hard with that first, with the sensory on the side, to make sure that they're, accepting new foods into their diet. So, we get there with every single client. I'd love to give you a little peek inside the group therapy, but every single day there's people on there saying they've got their child to try a new food, and I always ask, what therapy technique did you use? So it sort of educates other people on how they're getting success. But even from the outset, I had a client a couple of years ago who was on Oreo biscuits, and that's it, Oreo biscuits and milk, and it was horrible. She didn't want to disturb the child, or anytime she tried to encourage the child to eat any new food, it was met with a meltdown. This child only wanted to eat that, and that was it. It was probably one of the most serious cases I had, and we ended up having that child eat a whole array of fruits to begin with, because obviously we knew that he had a sweet tooth.
Yeah.
So we did that first. But as the child got a little bit older, we were able to encourage more vocabulary and more awareness of what he's putting into his body. And we started to introduce the notion of good bugs and bad bugs.
Oh, that's good.
And what we do is I do this in when I go to like classroom settings or daycare. So I'll get two big hula hoops out, and one will be green and one will be red. And I'll have a picture with some really sad looking bugs that are really mean and nasty in the red hoop. And then I'll have a green hoop with, lots of happy bugs, and it's almost like a garden floor of the picture. And what I'll do is I'll get a whole host of pictures, or sometimes I'll bring in products and I'll say, look, I want you to put in this hoop what you think is going to be happy for the good bugs or good for the bad bugs. The bad bugs obviously make us sick and give us colds and flus and snotty noses. So, and the kids are really, it really opens their eyes as to what goes in each, and it gives them a visual aspect to be able to really have a look inside what we need to build on to get a great gut biome. But a child with a limited diet, so this child on Oreos, the first thing we did is just said, right, you've got to make these biscuits yourself. So we had to sort of scour the internet for chocolate biscuit recipes that was somewhat healthy, and we just sort of built it from there. We removed the dairy, and I think that was the catalyst. The catalyst was that this child was hungry, but at the same time, he had no experience with other foods to be able to grasp onto. So once we moved the dairy, he was hungry. Then we built in a lot of sensory therapies around food. He was juicing every day, right? Wow. A juicer, oh my God, hands down, probably the only thing, if you have a fussy eater, the only appliance I recommend everyone goes out there and grabs, apart from a Thermomix, but they're quite expensive, is a juicer.
That's good.
They're the best tool in the kitchen, and a child loves, especially boys, they love the motor. They love,
true.
Not a noisy motor. If you've
pushing
got
things through it.
That's right. If you've got an audible, sensitive child, one that doesn't like to be around vacuum cleaners or circuses or loud, environments, then make sure you get a slow masticating one. Right. But the whole placing the fruits and vegetables down that chute, they're getting such a big education about what food does. And it actually shows them what happens when you chew food, which is the only tool in your kitchen that can possibly do that.
Yeah, it's true.
The first thing we did is got this child juicing and started to build some micronutrients. And just like that, the flick of a switch went off in his brain, and he just started to want more nutritious foods. And that we see a lot. We often say in the course, that switch is flicked. It's flicked. It's flicked.
When that's what I was talking about before with the GAPS foods. That's basically what I meant. So when you get nutrient-dense foods in, it just flicks the switch, and they start asking for fruit and veggies, and it's so amazing for so many parents. They're like, what's happened to my child?
It is. It comes down to the education, because I think if they've got, what parents often do is they only introduce foods around meal times. Right. And if you think about how many fights and how much anxiety you've had as a parent around that table, around that mealtime, around that time of the day, then you typically, you're going to expect that your child's not going to feel too comfortable about trying new foods at the table. They're going to be hyper alert, and they're going to be, their vision is also going to be highly sensitive. They're going to be detecting the slightest little change in their mashed potato or,
expecting it.
Yes, expecting it. So the best thing to do then is do all of your sensory play outside of meal times, where there's no expectation at all for food to pass the lips.
Yeah. And so then if it does, then it's an added bonus.
It's an added bonus. We clock up those new foods. We write them down and we count them to keep the momentum going.
Oh, that's so good. It sounds like your course is amazing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and where they can find it and what's in it?
Okay.
Do you have recipes in there?
Yes, I've got a whole recipe book in there that they're not typically gluten and dairy free. This just happens to be our diet, but they are typical foods that you would normally introduce as a basic food on a safe list of a child, preschool age. So typically you'll have lots of muffin recipes, things. I don't like to hide foods at all, so there's not a lot of that, but just basic ways of cooking foods, maybe with 5 or less ingredients. that is quite easy. There is, so the first, like I said, the first part of the course is all about learning about all the different causes of fussy eating, so that it sort of triggers a little bit of a memory as to how you came about to have a picky eating child. Picky and fussy are two different things, but a problem feeder is normally who I steer towards the course, because you'll gain everything you need to know. A fussy eater, there's only a couple of things you need to do, and all of those resources are free online. So the placemat is free online. You'll turn around a fussy eater with the placemat. I've also got another technique called the touch, blow, sniff, kiss, lick, nibble, which is all in visual format. So
you said that so quickly.
Oh, how many times do you think I've said it? I haven't thought of an easier analogy to explain it. On the forum, we call it TBS KLN. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. Course, but that tool is available for free just by popping in your email address on the front page. And with those two tools, you'll be able to eradicate a picky eater, but a problem feeder. They come with a whole host of different reactions that you won't get a whole lot of result out of those two tools, because you've typically got a child who's really has a huge emotional reaction of crying, gagging, vomiting, or anxiety around food. They might have nutritional deficiencies that we need to iron out. They might have a rapid growth decline, could have oral challenges as well, so may not be able to move food around the mouth to chew, and might have frequent meltdowns when food is present. Or you might have a child that is so limited with the foods that you can only count maybe 10 foods in the diet. Or perhaps the child will only eat with distractions, so TV, iPad, technology, or a book. So actually one of the biggest signs of a problem feeder is that they're missing particular food groups. So if you've got a child that doesn't eat any fruits or vegetables at all, that I would consider a problem feeder, and someone who needs help a little more than just the free resources I have online. So not everyone needs the course, just if you have some of those symptoms. And what's interesting is these symptoms of a problem feeder, if ongoing, can lead to diagnosis of ARFID. And of course, I don't know if you know much about that, but that's our new juvenile eating disorder. It's different to anorexia nervosa and bulimia, is because they're not worried about feeling fat at all. It's not a body image that drives the lack of desire to eat. It's just that they have absolutely no desire to interact with that sensory quality of the food, and it causes them anxiety. And then the anxiety obviously perpetuates anxiety. So that's when I say solve a problem feeder. The younger you do that, the better, because these early interventions will come a long way to solving the problem. As you get on throughout the school years, it becomes a little bit harder, because those habits are die hard. Certainly, I do deal with children up to the age of 10, and we get a lot of success, but you have to put in a lot more effort for these older kids. And they're at school but they're at school, they're out of your care most of the day as well. It's really hard to fit in sensory play around homework and all of these things. And they know how to tell you no. A 2 or 3 year old, you've got a little more control, I believe. So the first part of the course is just nailing out, what could have been that cause that many years ago? What could have been the cause of you to have a picky eater? The second part runs for around 6 hours, and that's all the therapy. And I do it all in a audiovisual format. They're all videos that you watch, and then you download the charts, and then you work out what you think is going to be best for your child based on the first part of the course. And then we pedal the course for 2 weeks. It's sort of sink or swim. Go off and try it. And then we come back and fine tune it, find out what's working. There's so many therapies in there that if it becomes boring or mundane or it's not working, there's the next thing you can try. Not every therapy is going to work for every child, but certainly everything that's in that course is based around a lot of research and has been getting a lot of success with universities and problem feeders throughout the world. So that's all in the course. And I also have guest speakers that are professionals in the area as well to really, it's a one-stop shop. And so after that 2 weeks, we move on to part 3, which is stretching food preferences. And we kind of slow down a little bit. We would have added a lot of foods to the diet already just by peddling the first 2 parts of the course, but we need to slow that down a little bit and just make sure that we manage a path that's easy for the parent and the child to move on with. So by this stage, you've got a good idea of what their sensory preferences and avoidances are, and that sets us up for an 80% success rate to be able to match new foods into the diet that they should like. So what we do is fill out a questionnaire of what foods they'd like the child to have. We might bring in the app if the child's old enough, and then work towards a list of 6 foods, either week or fortnight, depending on how quickly the child is willing to accept new foods into the diet. We work with 6 foods either on a weekly or fortnightly or monthly basis. So it just depends on the pace that the child's willing to move.
Sounds really full on, but amazing.
It is full on. It is full on. It's not a magic wand. Tell you that.
No, you've got to work at it. So how long does it usually take them to go through the course?
6 weeks.
Okay. So and then they just obviously continue working on their own, and they still have a support group though?
Yeah, that still is, yeah. Anyone who, well, the course is with you for life, because, I mean, some of these therapies, if you think
That's what I was thinking, you still have to keep working through things.
Well, yeah, some of the therapies, I've really made sure the course caters to children who are nonverbal or, not old enough to be able to pick up language yet. So every single therapy in my course has visual cues to show the child what's expected of them throughout that therapy. But not only that, all of the therapies can be sort of interchanged. You can use them into progress charts. So the touch, blow, sniff, kiss, lick, nibble, you can cut and paste and then put onto a progress chart. So you can show the child what progress they're making with particular foods, and then you can pick off the picture and show the child that they're adding new foods to their safe list. So all of the tools sort of work to combine each other. They're sort of multi-directional. So I had to make it really important that it was suitable for children who weren't able to speak, because if you think that these children are having a lot of trouble with being able to process their senses, we're going to be working a lot on that. Often what will happen is when we're working on the senses around food, they stop being able to process language.
Really?
Right? Yeah. So they're so super sensitive as to what, their brain is really focused on that. And their amygdala is really, working hard on making sure their stress system stays, regulated around food, that audibly, if you start trying to explain to a child the process of a therapy, it normally goes in one ear and out the other. So that's why I build a lot of visual cues so that the child can actually look at that picture and know what they should be doing at that point.
Wow, you put a lot of thought into it. It sounds amazing.
5 years in the making.
Oh, really? I was wondering.
Yeah.
I was going to
5 years in the making. I also worked with a lot of professionals to put it together as well.
It's very impressive. Well done.
Thanks.
Well, we'll put the links to all the things that you've been talking about in the show notes, if you can send those to me, and then people can click through to that. Is there anything else you wanted to mention, where they can find you, what you do?
Yes. At the moment, I'm not running the course. I run it twice a year.
Okay.
So I'm running people through the course now. We're on week 2. This is when they start peddling the course on their own. Yeah. Getting lots of emails. But I'm planning on running the course again around September time. But there are free resources that you can download and start trying now. If you have a fussy eater, a picky eater, it will be probably just a drop in the ocean to solve a problem feeder, but certainly, working with the senses, those tools are there for the interim before I launch again. But I'll send a course link to the course page, and if you want to be notified when I'm running the course again, just pop your email address in there, and then I'll start sending you some emails when I'm looking at launching.
Okay, that's great. And you're on Facebook and Instagram, or where are you?
Yes, I'm all over the socials.
Okay,
it's not the fun part of my job, but I guess I've got to be there. Yeah.
Do you put out little, tips and stories and things on there, or what kind of things do you share?
Yeah, I'd say my Facebook is probably the place I like to update more often, and it's where I'm sharing little snippets of information from my group therapy as well. Right, so. Facebook is probably, I think it's easier to put a message across on Facebook than it is on Instagram.
Yeah, and it's easy for people to sort of connect and have a discussion.
That's right, because you've got to go via bio sometimes to get the information. I think that sort of slows down the process. So Facebook is usually where I'm at. But if Instagram's your thing there, I've always got the bio updated.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for that.
Not a problem.
It was really interesting, and I learnt heaps that I wish I'd known.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, that's my goal. That's my goal, to nourish our next generation and eradicate these picky eaters.
Pass it all on to my nieces and nephews who are now having kids. So.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Good. So thank you so much. It was lovely to meet you and talk to you, and all the best with the course at the moment. I hope everyone goes well, and we'll be interested to hear about some of the stories. Maybe another time we'll get you back on. So
I'd love to come back on again, Jo. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.